where it killed, multiple injuries. And then the tornado kind of skipped over Norman and went over to Shawnee, Oklahoma, and there's massive devastation over there. Seeing that the high school gymnasium was completely destroyed, you can see the floor of the gymnasium from the sky view. And like I said, it's kind of a somber day, and it's very disheartening. And just it just we know that nature will take its course, but it nevertheless it still hurts whenever something like this happens to our neighbors. So with that in mind, I'd like for everybody to just bear with us just a little bit. We are experiencing trouble here at our studio. Because of the weather impact and the way the electricity has been impacted within this area, I've been losing connectivity and I've been losing electricity. It's been intermittent. And I believe that's not because we were impacted here personally where we're at, but because the power lines from the distribution centers are going through those areas of Shawnee and south of us that they're trying to reconnect power. In order to reconnect power, they have to disconnect the power. You know what I'm saying? It's rather disappointing that, or it's not disappointing. It's something that has to be done. Just disappointed that it's happening at this exact moment when we're trying to do this, but we have to be patient with them. We have to have a great deal of understanding. There's a lot of people suffering out there beyond ourselves. So, but just wanted to keep that in mind. Um, if in the event this Twitter space completely fails, um, Kelly McGinnis with Arkansas Coffee with Democrats, she will get another space going immediately once she recognizes that this will fail, and we'll start a new one on her site just as soon as that takes place. Also, Kelly, if you wouldn't mind reaching out to Ray, he got disconnected and ask him to rejoin us and apologize. I'll apologize him whenever he gets on here too. But we'd like for Coffee with Democrats Ohio to be able to come back on and reconnect with us here. So with us today, this is such an honored event for us. We really appreciate being friends with a fellow Democrat, someone who is very known to all of us that's on this space, Jess Piper. Jess, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing well, and I'm very sorry to hear about the severe storms and the tornadoes in Oklahoma. And I'm thinking of you guys right now.
Well, we appreciate that. It we were being told for a couple of days in advance that we were in a slightly elevated risk, very slight. Last night was not slight. It was a massive tornado. If you follow Reed Timmer, who's one of our national treasures that goes all over the nation following these tornadoes and does a lot of reporting, he was in Cole when that tornado took place, and his footage is just it'll take your breath away. But I hope you have a cup of coffee with you this morning, Jess, and because we've got a lot to talk about. The the stuff that's going on here, it doesn't stop what's going on in our red legislators. They just don't get it. The red legislatures, the supermajority Republican legislatures, they just keep attacking democracy day in and day out. No matter what happens outside, they're continuing to do something. So I hope you have a good cup of coffee and ready to sit down for a little conversation with us.
Well, I've been up since about 5:30, and I've had too much coffee, so I've switched to water. But I'm so glad to be with you, and I'm really glad that you are focused on the right thing. You are focused on red state legislatures, where all the bad things are happening, where they are dismantling democracy. And this is what I always tell friends and everybody I talk to. Don't look at you guys. You got to look at your state house, because that is where the Republicans have honed in, and they've got a huge advantage especially in super majorities, right? And in gerrymandered states like Ohio, like Oklahoma, like Missouri. So we're seeing this across the Midwest and the South. So this is an important conversation.
Sure, sure. And we are so glad to have you. And um, just before we move on, let's just ask a couple personal questions. How are you doing? Are you dealing with all of this negativity in a good, positive way?
I am. Once you get to a certain point, I think a follower count or something happens on Twitter and in other spaces where you are followed by almost as many, trolls as you are folks who are wanting to know about red state politics. So I'm doing fine. Yesterday, a Missouri GOP representative's brother doxed me, put my entire, address online, which was really unfortunate because I had done a really good job of letting people think that I lived in another part of my county than I actually did.
Right.
So they couldn't, find my kid. And they put that out there for everybody to see. So I'm angry. I'm upset. And everyone should know that when you push back, when you stand up, I mean, sometimes, things like this happen, and it did, and there will be no consequences. Nobody will have to answer for what they did, but what I'm doing is worth it. What you guys are doing is worth it, so we keep moving forward.
It's amazing you talk about that. It's amazing that everybody has consequences except the GOP. They seem to hold no accountability to their own people and their own actions. They wanted to just put everything under the carpet, sweep it under the carpet, and just keep on moving on. And just like Forrest Gump used to say, it just yeah, every day's like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. It just
But we do know what we're going to get in red states. And today, so I was on Twitter this morning and I saw that Minnesota has passed bills to feed every single kid in school, no cost. Michigan has passed, fantastic gun sense legislation, making their constituents safer. And Missouri, the first thing they're debating this morning is hand-to-hand combat,
right.
whether we should allow hand-to-hand combat in the state of Missouri. So you're right about the fact that they're unaccountable. They can do insane things. We can call, we can complain, we can post, we can write, we can email. They're not accountable to us. I don't. I call someone, I email someone every single day. One of my legislators. I do not get calls back. I do not get emails back. And that's the way it is. They don't have to listen to us because they are in a gerrymandered district. We don't have Democrats running against them. They have no fear and they do whatever their donors want.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. So before we move on a little bit, we've got a list of questions and things, that topics that we want to talk to you about. Another point of housekeeping that I want to ask everybody that is on here and listening to this. This is such a fantastic conversation. We've got such a dynamic speaker with us to talk about these issues. If everybody who is listening, if you would please go to the top of the Twitter space, you'll see over on the upper right hand side, you'll see an up arrow with bracket underneath of it. That is to forward to all of your Twitter followers that you are on this space and you're listening into this. If you would, please go ahead and let all of your listeners know, share that you are on this Twitter space and invite them to come and listen to it, because Jess is such an outstanding ambassador for democracy. We really need to go ahead and let as many people know to come on and join this conversation. So, Jess, one of the things that we didn't do the last time that you were on here, and I apologize if this catches you off guard, but we really didn't talk about Jess in your biography. We talked about a lot of issues surrounding education and your campaign, but we didn't get to know really who Jess was very much, about where you grew up. I didn't know it until afterwards that you grew up in Arkansas.
Yeah, I would say that my background has everything to do with the person I am today. I was born to teenage parents. My mom was 16, my dad was 19. He was in the Navy. I was born in Metairie, Louisiana. and we moved from there to Mississippi, and we lived there for a couple years while my dad was still in the Navy. My mom and dad got divorced, and then it was just like the story of so many poor folks. We moved everywhere. I lived in Oklahoma, where close to where you are. I lived in Bunch, Oklahoma. So I was, Louisiana and Mississippi and Oklahoma and Missouri for a time. My parents were both born in Independence. And then we settled back to where their family was from, and that is in Arkansas. And that's where I graduated from high school. I was an Ozark hillbilly, swear to God, that was our mascot. And I went from there, and I was married very young because, there's not much to do in Arkansas. You just get married and have kids. So I was married at 18. I had my first child at 20, had another at 26. And I went back to college as a non-traditional student, and that's where everything changed for me. I was born and raised a evangelical Southern Baptist, and would consider myself very conservative. But I went to college and I started reading books that I had never read before. I read Gilgamesh, which really unwound everything in my head because, as a fundamentalist, I know this sounds crazy to people. As a fundamentalist, I was taught that the Bible was the first book ever written. And when I got my hands on Gilgamesh and realized that that wasn't true, things just started falling apart, right? I really started struggling with what was going on. Ended up leaving the Southern Baptist Church in the late 90s. Traveled, came up to Missouri, ended up getting a divorce, got another husband, had another child. And all this while I was teaching American literature and English, and I loved my job. But, politics 2016 happened, and you know what? I was done.
So let's talk about college. You didn't just sit in your chair and fall back into a teaching position. You had to go to college and work hard for it. And so, can you tell us where you went to college, your university?
Yeah, University of Arkansas at Fort Smith is where I got my bachelor's in English. And after I graduated, I was like, okay, now what? And everybody was like, I don't know. Like, what are you going to do with an English degree, stupid?
Well,
So I was like, well, I'd really like to teach. And I had a lot of professors say, you're kind of natural in front of a classroom. So I ended up getting my master's from the University of Arkansas at Monticello, which is right on the Louisiana line, way down south. And then I started teaching. And the thing that really opened my eyes. I loved going to school. I love being a student. I love learning. But I took an African American history class on a whim because it was available, and I thought, well, I need a history credit, and that my life changed.
right,
Everything changed. I grew up in a slave state in Arkansas, in Mississippi, Louisiana, and I had no idea the history of slavery. I didn't have it. I had this huge hole in my knowledge, and once you learn that kind of stuff, you can't forget it.
right. It's so amazing that that time period where you were um, formulating your identity, the government suppressed the knowledge that you needed, that all of us needed, because I was in the same thing even back in the 60s and 70s. We were suppressed on the knowledge. I mean, the Cowboys and the Indians, we were all um, kind of told that the Cowboys were the heroes. And in reality, the Cowboys, it had nothing to do with. It was all about suppressing the Native Americans. It was, it's that whole time period. It's just like, I keep thinking of the Lone Ranger and how warped and disturbed that whole concept really is today. So I think we're going to move ahead to another topic. Um, uh, so let's talk a little bit about gun violence. And you were talking about the Missouri is talking about hand to hand combat, but in some respects, this can go back to the NRA and how the NRA is pushing this whole warped opinion about the Second Amendment. But you we had a lot of bad things happen right there in Kansas City. We had an individual. who went out to a neighbor's house and went to the wrong house just because of the color of his skin. I don't have all the details, but that's the first concept that goes to my mind. Just because of the color of his skin, he gets shot at the front door. Can you talk any more about what that happened and what the response was throughout Missouri and in the Kansas City region?
I can say that as a community, a state, and as a nation, that we were horrified that that would happen to Ralph Yarl. It was definitely race related. More details have come out in the Kansas City Star saying that this man sat around all day, was indoctrinated by OAN and Newsmax and Fox News, and taught to be scared and fearful of everybody and everything. And Ralph rang a doorbell and he shot him through the door. He shot him through the door and then came out and shot him again. And this is in North Kansas City. It's called Northland. And actually, my son doesn't live too far away from where this happened. It's, of communities of older folks, of working white folks. And, in later years, it's become, more diverse. This was awful. And I think we were right to come out and say something. But in Missouri, we have stand your ground laws, and obviously this wouldn't stand for it because Ralph didn't even cross the threshold. He was standing at the door. But in Missouri, you don't even have to retreat to shoot someone who's come on your property, who's coming close to your lawn, who's coming close to your car. These laws, and I should say I'm a gun owner. I'm a responsible gun owner, but I'm a gun owner nonetheless. These laws are meant to intimidate people. They're meant to make us fearful. They're made to make people like me have to constantly regulate and look out for the emotions of some armed guy in the grocery store who may get pissed at something, or I'm driving down the road and I accidentally cut someone off. Things like this are made to intimidate us, and that's why you see laws in red states constantly chipping away at the rights of the rest of us, because literally they've come to this point where you feel like they're saying, if you infringe at any point on my right to own a gun, we'll shoot you.
Right.
Right. That's what it's come to.
That's so disturbing. It's as if our legislators now, the supermajority red legislators, they want us to live in the old west, where high noon comes around, there's going to be a gunfight every day, but the consequences of this, there's tragic, and look at the families, look at your family and what they're going through, and the last I heard, the gentleman, this kid is still surviving. He's in the hospital in recovery, but he's still got a long ways to go because if I'm not mistaken, he was shot in the head. Yeah.
He was, but he's been released and he's at home now. But beyond those, physical injuries, Ralph has to contend with the fact that he is not safe in his
Hmm.
neighborhood. And that's what the GOP wants. They want a breakdown of our communities. They want us to be fearful of each other. They want us to, treat neighbors with disdain instead of speaking to them and talking to them and coming together for, what's best for our communities. This is deliberate by folks in the GOP.
And uh, we can accept the fact that the GOP, their whole philosophy is a failed philosophy. We can look at what happened at Memphis Covenant Baptist School and the fact that the report was that there was armed teachers when the 911 call went in to the police. They said out, I mean, in that call, there are teachers in this school that are armed. Did any of those people try to address this person with a gun? Did they stop that person? No, they had to wait. They hid instead of. So what was the purpose of arming or allowing the teachers to be armed if they weren't going to use any kind of effort to stop a gunman from entering their school? It
The purpose of what the GOP is doing is not to create safety in schools. They will do anything except address the point that unfettered gun access in this country is making all of us less safe. They are having to contend with the fact that parents have had enough, and for sure the kids have had enough. And I'm going to tell you, they're scared of Gen Z. And that's why they're going to try to suppress their vote. But Gen Z showed up in Tennessee and they had enough, and they went to the Capitol and they marched and they chanted and they made lawmakers' lives miserable until Governor Bill Lee finally did something about it. And don't think for one second Bill Lee had planned to, do red flag laws before those kids showed up. But he knows and he feels the pressure. And that's why groups like this are so important, because we've got to put the pressure on these people who aren't listening to us and don't care what we say.
Right. That goes back to what you said with the red flag laws. Had the red flag laws been in place where this person had put stuff out on the internet, told their family members that she was buying these weapons, um, there could have been an intervention with the red flag law that was in place. It could have prevented this whole thing from happening, and possibly could have even prevented her from buying the guns in the beginning. Um, that again, that's just supposition on my part, just on the outside looking towards Tennessee. But I mean, we can also look at what happened in Uvalde, where police officers still showed up, armed police officers, trained police officers supposedly, went to Uvalde and did nothing for nearly an hour. And
Those those police officers know, just like the rest of us, you can't bring a knife to an AR
that's right.
fight. There, when we are supplying ARs to the general public, when we're allowing people to, kill 7 people in 30 seconds, there's an issue. Even police officers have that in their brain that says we can't go forward because we know we're all going to die. And that is what the GOP, that's the biggest hypocrisy with them, saying that they back the blue or that they stand with police officers while they are letting people on the streets gain access to guns that will absolutely kill police officers in the line of duty. It's complete hypocrisy, and it's wrong. And every single police officer should understand they are putting the gun lobby before they are putting your safety, right?
Absolutely.
Police officers voting for Republicans, it's like a teacher voting for Republicans. Like, what are you doing, friend? Like, they don't care about you and they are actively harming
Right.
you.
Last week we had an outstanding speaker come on here, Adrian Fontes. He's the Secretary of State for Arizona, and he's got just an outstanding YouTube where he enumerates how the Second Amendment is being misinterpreted, and this conscious effort by the GOP to continue to misinterpret based on the NRA suggestion that the right will never be infringed, and that whole concept is about keeping the guns away from the militia, in that not that the general public should ever even have these guns. We're talking about guns of combat. We're not talking about, what I have in my closet, when I used to go deer hunting and bird hunting, um, or just having a sports gun to go out to the target shop, to a shoot targets. The idea is they're they're proposing, and they continue to push this myth, this lie, that ARs are allowed, and it's acceptable for us to have ARs. And the whole thought of, my neighbors, I live in a cul-de-sac, and my neighbors having ARs, and they have no place to go shoot them, so they're going to go out into the street. This whole concept just boggles the mind on what are we doing with these guns. And
Not only that, but like the gun laws, the very basics of things. So we talk about red flag laws, which are helpful to keep people who shouldn't have loaded guns, to keep them away from them. And in Missouri, we have a representative that is presenting a bill for an anti-red flag law,
that would
right?
prevent
She's a
that. Yeah.
24-year-old new representative that wants to make sure that anyone can have a gun. And it's not, people will say, it's against due process. No, it is not, because a judge has to do that. It's not police officers just going in and confiscating guns. It's through a judge. So there is due
Right.
process. So all of this speaking about it being unconstitutional, that's not true. And the Supreme Court in the Heller decision already said that not everybody has the right to own any gun that they want. I mean, for God's sake, in Missouri, it was too much, too far for Missouri Republicans to say that children can't open carry guns on public land. Toddlers. My 4-year-old granddaughter can get a gun and walk down the street. And nobody can do anything because she has the right in Missouri as a 4-year-old to have a loaded
Right.
gun. It's insanity.
I'm going to turn over to Steve. Steve, you have a question that I want to allow you to get on here.
Yeah. Good morning. Good morning, Jess. I'm really enjoying the conversation. Glad you came on. Good to hear from you again.
Good morning.
I wanted to just you guys are already making this point, and I just want to kind of further clarify that really what we're talking about, from my perspective as an attorney, is a perversion of the judicial system. And a great example has just come out recently down in Texas with Governor Abbott immediately seeking to pardon a convicted murderer, Daniel Perry, who killed a protester in Austin, and he was convicted by a jury of his peers in Texas. And Abbott wants to immediately pardon him to essentially justify, as a kind of matter of, I suppose you might call it modern lynching, and the approval of that, the killing of protesters by, GOP fanatics. And then we can go on and on and on and on and talk about this, of course, and we're all in agreement. But at the end of the day, it comes back to what you said at the beginning of this session, Jess. We need to elect more representatives and senators at the state level. And how do we do that?
It's all about that. It's 100% about that. In my state, in Missouri, 40% of the seats went completely unopposed by Democrats. So 66 seats were given to Republicans on a silver platter that they could walk up to Jeff City and do whatever the hell they wanted. And I'm telling you, that's exactly what they're doing, because there's no accountability, right? Because we don't run anyone against them. And my entire thing, I'm working with Blue Missouri. I'm the executive director. My entire thing is to raise money for down ballot candidates who usually don't get a dime. And this is why. Because if someone has the prospect of thinking, I've got to raise $20,000, but I work full time, I have kids, I'm also supposed to be knocking doors and making phone calls, how can I do that? They need someone who has their back. And right now we're in panic mode in Missouri. We're making knee-jerk decisions because we are at the lowest point we've ever been. We don't have a statewide elected Democrat. The last one we had was Nicole Galloway, and she was replaced by a Republican. The Republicans know this. They don't have to spend money in places like where I am until someone like me runs. I ran and I lost, but they had to drop $100,000 in my race because I was here. That state representative that ran against me had to stay home. He couldn't go other places and do fundraisers with other reps. He had to knock some doors. He had to make some calls because I was serious and I was contesting him. Now, we had 66 races where that didn't happen. Those GOP members did not have to spend a dime. So do you think they put that money in their pocket and walk away with it? No. They take that money and they start chipping away at the blue areas. They head to St. Louis, Columbia, Springfield, Kansas City, and they start attacking our blue strongholds, right? So when we don't compete, and when we don't compete, by the way, you hear this all the time. People say, you vote against your own self-interest. This is your fault. Look who you voted for. Well, I'm here to tell you that 2.5 million Missourians had no choice. There was no one for them to vote for. So how in God's name would they vote in their self-interest, right? So it's a long game. We can't make knee-jerk decisions, and we can't say we're going to focus on these 4 races and that's it in the state. There are 163, and we got to focus on all of them if we're ever going to take this state back.
That's an amazing concept that you're talking about, and that's just not happening only in Missouri. We can look to the south in Arkansas. The same thing is happening there, and we've got Kelly on here as well as the Rural Caucus. They're working very, very hard to change that so that every every district has a candidate. Here in Oklahoma, we just hired David Roberts to try to do more outreach, to try to do the same thing within Oklahoma. But again, we got a long stretch to go before we can get to that point where every single district has a candidate. But you've got a very good point that if you allow things to go uncontested, you basically surrender a large swath of your state to the GOP. And then what they do with their funding, then that funding mechanism is like a snowball. It starts small, but it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's how all of a sudden Missouri's got, guess who? Josh Hawley.
Yeah, now Eric
Right.
Schmidt. And let me tell you this too, friends. What happens when we don't compete in every district is that you will have extremists come in and win, because during the primaries, you're only voting for Republicans, and only the most folks who pay attention and the most extreme votes, people who vote in primaries. So like Democrats, we vote for our own version, but the Republicans will absolutely vote the most extreme person in. And then when they're not contested, they win. And here's what happens. They don't stop at state rep, because we have term limits, which by the way are awful. That means that lobbyists are writing your laws. But anyway, they're term limited. So they go from state rep to senator, and then they go from senator to, going to a US senator or a congressperson. And this is what happens. We had a guy named Eric Burleson who nullified every federal gun law in Missouri, which I know is not legal. We can't supersede federal laws, but we did it anyway. And by the way, it's still in effect almost 2 years later. So he nullified federal gun laws. He wasn't, he wasn't contested for several years. He ended up going to Congress. He's in Congress now. The first law he wrote that impacts every single person in the United States was to nullify federal gun laws at the federal
Right.
level. When we don't stop extremists, they don't stop. They keep going, and they go to higher offices, which is how every single person in the United States is impacted by Josh Hawley. He used to be Missouri's
Right.
problem. Now he's
He
America's
is. He
problem.
is. You know, kind of changing subject just a little bit, but it's in the same line with this. During the early 1990s, late 1980s, George Bush, he worked with the gun lobbies and uh, did a bipartisan approach with the Brady bill, and really put some real constraints on weapons. And it was a bipartisan affair, and it was really brought about by the GOP. At the same time that was taking place over in Topeka, Kansas, we had a, a pastor of Westboro Baptist Church over there who started this whole effort about calling our service members, names, and telling things about we hate gays and we hate whomever. It was all about hate, hate, hate. That was a very small movement during the 1990s. Now flip the stages on this whole thing. Now we've got the entire GOP almost screaming the playbook of Fred Phelps in the Westboro Baptist Church on a daily basis. In the GOP, the gun lobbies have just basically acquiesced everything to the NRA, and just everything's about hate and discontent and creating more division. It's just like the script is completely flipped in 30 years. And
That's the extremism that you're seeing. And the way it works is because gerrymandering states, and the most extreme person is the one who wins because they're uncontested, and then they're allowed to say those things out loud. They're allowed to attack trans kids. They're allowed to put guns in toddlers' hands. They're allowed to attack our air and our water. And living in a red state can feel like you're so constricted. It feels like a straitjacket sometimes. You just want to wake up and
yeah,
and scream because of what is going on. It's not popular. I knocked so many doors. I didn't have one person tell me in my tiny rural place that they were worried about a trans kid. Not
Right.
one. Not one talked about a drag show. Not one said, "Hey, could we have hand-to-hand combat in Missouri?" They are not only not listening to Democrats, they're not listening to anyone.
Yeah.
And we have this misconception that Democrats left rural America. They did, but you know who else left? The Republicans. I don't have anyone knocking my door or calling me or asking for a vote. They just assume we're going to give it to them because they, might hate the same people as some of the other people out here. But I talked to good folks who didn't understand that even though you don't like Joe Biden, he doesn't have anything to do with funding your road or your
Right.
school,
Right.
right? Yeah, so it's a lot of education and bringing people back, which by the way, is the reason they want to get rid of civics and history so that nobody knows what's going on and who's moving the parts behind the
Right.
curtain.
So you remember you went down and spent some time in Arkansas, and you met with Kelly McGinnis down there with the Rural Caucus.
Yes.
Kelly's on here, and I'm going to turn this over to Kelly for a little bit. She's such a great ambassador for Arkansas. I'm just going to take a minute to just say she's a great ambassador for Arkansas, but she's also a great ambassador for Coffee with Democrats and helping to expand Coffee with Democrats throughout the nation. And she's been a real joy for us to get to know, and she's become a very good friend of ours. So, Clay, I'm going to turn this over to you for a little bit.
Thank you, Kevin. Good morning, Jess. Yeah, I was so excited to hear you speak when you came to Farmington for our town hall with the Rural Caucus. And we talked a lot about the Learns Act that we have here in Arkansas and all the different changes that they're making to our education system. Missouri's had a lot of changes before us. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? When did it start?
It was about a decade ago when it seems like they were purposely starting to defund Missouri schools. In 2017, they lowered the bar for school funding, which then they were able to say every year, "Hey, we met the bar," right? Well, they lowered it, but they slide that thing in. They do stuff like that when people aren't paying attention. They've got us now to where we are 49th in educational funding and 50th in starting teacher pay. And I always tell everybody, you don't arrive in last place by accident. This is purposeful because once they got us to that point, they introduced a voucher scheme and they passed it through. And so now Missouri taxpayers help fund the private school tuition of people who are, sometimes really well to do. So, we have a voucher scheme and say you give me a voucher, heck, give me 20. It doesn't matter. I have absolutely nowhere that I could use a voucher in my rural community. Kids with disabilities are kept out of these places. And the data says this: 2/3 of all people who used vouchers last year already had their kid in a private school. So now we are just, it's welfare for the well to do.
Yeah, that's similar to what they're doing here. The kids that are already in private school will be receiving the vouchers and receiving that tax credit before any of the children that are in public school will be able to utilize it. So um, they've essentially they've defunded public schools is what they've done here, or what they're going to do here. It sounds like that's what they've done in Missouri.
Yeah, it's almost like a money laundering scheme if you think about it, because it's a dollar for dollar credit for these tax scholarships. So the money never really arrives at the treasury. And so in that case, they can funnel public money into private and religious schools and kind of skate around the, separation of church and state, which frankly, I mean, they're just out in the open about violating that anymore with abortion bans and everything else. They're saying, I don't believe this because of my religion, so I'm going to impose it on the rest of the state. So vouchers are really bad. And I'm going to tell you, you did it in Arkansas, and we are doing it in Missouri. It's happening in Iowa. It may be happening in Oklahoma as well. The defunding of public education is hand in hand with the rolling back of child labor laws. They want kids like mine, kids like yours, going to work at an early age, learning to live on, minimum wage, learning to live without benefits, that sort of thing, while they're, putting their schools down to 4 days a week. So this is purposeful. It's, the immigration that folks used to rely on to, for certain positions, certain jobs. They're not utilizing that anymore. What they're doing is using children to cover, instead of raising the wage or giving someone benefits to make them apply for a job. They're like, hey, kids will do it for less. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but this really bothered me, and it's probably been a year or two ago when I saw it. It was at McDonald's, and they said they were hiring, and for each age bracket there was a different pay rate. And I was like, wait, what's what does this mean? And I think we all know what it means.
Right. Wow. Wow. And I did see we've had a meeting, a committee meeting in Fort Smith, and while we were there, I saw a sign at McDonald's that said that they were hiring for, an adult crew for the night shift, and they were now hiring children. Um, it's a different world, it feels like sometimes, with
Well,
these
it's the
new.
it's the old world, right? I mean, we're
Yeah,
we're going back to kids in mind.
right,
I mean,
right.
everything old is new again with the GOP.
Exactly. You mentioned the 4-day school week. When did that start? How did that come about? What was the reasoning?
The reason is because we didn't fund our schools. My daughter graduated from one that has it's Lathrop. I think they have been doing 4-day weeks for probably 15 years now. I worked at one that's been doing it for over a decade. The data all points to the fact that they don't score as well as kids who go to 5-day school weeks. I mean, they miss 36 days a week. I mean, 36 days a year. Now multiply that times 12 years. That's a long time. So 4-day school weeks were meant to recruit and retain teachers because we pay them so poorly that, giving them a 4-day week was incentive. The problem is now that 30% of schools are on a 4-day week. And so it's no longer really an incentive anymore. And so now we're just like, now what, 3-day weeks? I mean, what are rural schools like mine pay their teachers, $32,000 a year. And after a teacher pays into her Missouri retirement, she could walk out making $1,300 a month. Like that's her
Wow.
income with a bachelor's degree. So, and like I said, it's purposeful. They meant to do this. And what happens in rural schools like mine is you have a revolving door of teachers. And we know that the number one indicator of student learning is actually teacher quality, making sure you have good teachers. And this is no shade at new teachers. I've been one myself, but you do need a balance. So if my daughter has a new teacher in third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, that starts impacting learning.
Right. Yeah, that does. That does. And how does this have any impact on the teachers union?
What union?
Same,
That's
same here. Yeah.
that's the funniest part. There are unionized teachers in Kansas City, St. Louis, Springfield, those sort of Columbia. But everywhere else, out in rural Missouri, we are under something called MSTA, which is the Missouri State Teachers Association, which is basically a club. They don't bargain for wages, they don't bargain for conditions, nothing. So that's the funniest part when people talk about, oh, you're just a union shill, and I'm like, that's the funniest stuff I have ever heard in my life. They are not unionized in rural places, and that's not just Missouri, that's Arkansas, that's everywhere.
Yeah. I agree with that. Ugh, the attacks on the education system really just as a parent with a child with disabilities, it worries me. We live in a rural area, and there aren't any private schools in our immediate area. Thankfully, we have an amazing public school district that my children go to, but I wish that all children throughout the state and throughout your state, had that quality, but they don't, and it's unfortunate because with this I know here in Arkansas with the LEARNS Act, um, the private schools are able to turn children away who have disabilities, and that doesn't sit right with me.
I'm going to tell you right now. I mean, all of this is related. Guns, the provision of guns in our communities, the defunding of schools, making sure that people don't have unions, keeping people in low wage positions, that sort of thing. It's all connected. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, that's a full frontal war on Arkansas. When she was elected, I mean, I could see what was going to happen because I saw her in the White House for so long. But it's a war on your state. It's a war on your citizens. She absolutely means everything she's doing, right? And so we have to understand, like in Missouri, sometimes I think that with our governor, I mean, he seems inept a lot. Sarah is not. She knows what she's doing. She feels like DeSantis, right? Like she means business. She's going to privatize your entire state, and the rest of you are going to do what you're told, when you're told, show up to work for those minimum wage jobs and mind your business and shut up and don't talk to us, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And what's so disturbing about
Thank
that?
you so much, Jess.
And what's so disturbing about Sarah Huckabee is she's working with this concept now of making people, what is it, a 100 word or is it 200 word essay about how Sarah Huckabee Sanders is a great person and a great contribution to Arkansas and Arkansas. So you have to have a litmus test just to be employed with the state. It seems like that's the direction that she's going. And then I seen just the other day, Trump wants to do the same thing. If he gets reelected and goes into Washington, D.C., everybody's going to have this political litmus test. And they're going to have to be vetted in order to be allowed to work for the government. And Sarah's already starting to do that in Arkansas, and that, and just take it from me, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. This is coming to a state near you very quick.
The funniest thing about all of that is that I mean, I'm born and bred rural. All of my family members, my grandparents, my great grandparents, I mean, they were, farmers in Arkansas. They were progressives. They weren't bootlickers. So to see my communities and rural communities turn and start, uh, pledging allegiance to corporations and people who stand for corporations is just I can't say enough about how awful it is and how strange it is because progressivism works for rural folks. And you know this because of this. When we have ballot initiative measures, when they voted for recreational weed, medicinal weed, when we voted to expand Medicaid, when we voted down right to work, it went through really well in Missouri. Then they turned around and voted for Republican politicians, right? And I'll tell you why that happened. Because when you read a ballot initiative measure, you have to read it and you have to figure out if the policy is good for you. And folks know that progressive policies are good for them. And then they turn around and vote for an R because that's what they think they're supposed to do. And sometimes, friends, let me tell you, sometimes that's all they've ever voted for because it's been 2 decades since a Democrat has been on their
Right.
ticket. So we know progressivism works. We know people long for these things. We have to connect the dots for them and say, this right to work was terrible for you and your wages. Your Republican representative that you voted for, he wants that to come through.
Right.
So you have to talk to people.
And that's all.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Kevin,
Yeah.
could I just step in for a second? Thanks. So, Jess, I think you make a beautiful point. And when you have these grassroots initiatives, you can't gerrymander those. And it's completely a different mode than just going and voting for an R. You do have to read it. And you have an opportunity also to organize around that. And this is something that several of us have been floating just in terms of a popular grassroots initiative, that would revolve around women's rights. We've seen what happened in Kansas. Even actually here recently, the Oklahoma Supreme Court came out and has constitutionally established a right to abortion, a limited right to abortion in Oklahoma. I don't think that's got that much news coverage. But that's a tenuous decision because the deciders in that opinion is a 5-4 decision, and they're old, and we may have our governor appointing a new justice or two here over the next 3 years that will shift the balance. And as we know, the conservatives on the court, as Alito did, will come back and say, this was never the right decision to provide any protections for abortion for women in Oklahoma. But to come back to your point about grassroots initiatives, I think it's a wonderful opportunity, not just for people to actually express their opinions and their vote across the state, but to organize around for the Democratic Party. And yet so far, and Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, it just really hasn't resonated for some reason, and maybe this is just my personal opinion, with the Democratic Party here in Oklahoma.
I'll say something, Steve, about that. That's the reason. That's the entire reason that you see these gerrymandered state houses going after initiative petition process, because they know abortion is a winning issue for the Democrats. They know, just like they found out in Kansas, you put it on the ballot and we're going to say, yes, women have a right to an abortion. And so that is exactly why states like Missouri, Ohio is doing it right now. Iowa is considering it. They are going to block initiative petition processes because they know that's our workaround in these gerrymandered states to get the things that we need. And so they are attacking them right now.
Right.
Hey, good morning, guys. It's Ray. How are you?
Good.
Hey, Jess. Yeah, in Ohio, I could definitely tell you they're definitely coming after ballot initiatives and referendums. The referendum on abortion is going through so successfully in signature collection that the Ohio State Legislature is in the process of changing the rules. So instead of getting 50% of the vote, they're now trying to change it to 60% of the vote, and instead of getting and also changing the voting date to August instead of in November. So they're fast tracking it through. And
that's really weird that you say that, Ray, because the very exact thing happened here. It's almost like it's a coordinated effort, right?
Exactly. Well, that's exactly what it is. They saw what happened in Kansas, and they see what's going on in all these other states, and they're afraid of the people. That's what it is. And whenever they see that the people are speaking and acting, they're going against the people's will. And we saw what happened. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say a 50-40 vote is a will of the minority. That means minority rule. And that's never been the place of the Constitution of the United States, is for the minority to rule the mass. So it's very disheartening for us. And we got to understand, this attack on democracy starts at a 60-40 vote. That attack is also a fascist attack. Let's not mince words. We're being attacked by a fascist organization that wants to do everything they can to eliminate the majority rule.
And that's exactly what we live under in a red state. And if you're from a red state, if you're from a GOP supermajority, you understand this very well. I saw a reporter from The Atlantic saying the other day that we're using the word fascism wrong. Friend, come to Missouri.
Yeah.
You come to Ohio and you tell me exactly what you're looking at, because this is fascism. This is how it works. And this is what they do. And it is minority rule. And they're able to do it because they have gerrymandered seats and because we do not have candidates, who go against them. And I'll say this. If you can't find a Democrat to run against, an awful extremist in your area, look for a moderate Republican and say, I may not be able to find a Democrat to run against you, but I can primary you and I will beat you if you do not do the things that the folks want. If you don't listen to us and you don't care about us, we will primary you and we'll take that seat away from you.
Well, and just to add to that, Jess, I will say that I registered as a Republican several years ago when we had a primary for a district attorney, and that was going to be the race. That was going to be it. There was no Democrat running, and the incumbent was just crazy Sharia law GOP Republican, and I backed a a really rational, very conservative, the rational Republican. He's doing a wonderful job as our district attorney. He got elected in that primary. And there were a number of us that switched over temporarily to register as Republicans so that our vote would count. And I make no apologies for that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of a lot of people doing that, you know. In fact, when I was running, they were like, run as a Republican. I'm like, one, ain't nobody gonna believe that. and two, and two, I mean, my progressive values mean I'm a Democrat. The things I stand for mean I'm a Democrat. And our party, and I'm not faulting you at all, because you got to do what you got to do. But our party stands for something. We stand for labor. We stand for people. We stand for rights. We stand for schools. We want people healthy and happy and educated. That's what a Democrat is, right? And so every single one of us shouldn't be ashamed to say we're a Democrat. We shouldn't be ashamed to be a progressive, because we value people. And the other side, and I wish that it wasn't like this. I wish I didn't have to constantly say the GOP is against the regular folks, but they are. At this point, they are. And so we have to say what we mean, and we have to say what we're seeing and point to the people who are in power. And that's what I would say to everybody on this call, is to absolutely, the Missouri GOP has been in charge for 20 years, 2 decades. There is no one we can blame for a failing school, for our roads that are falling apart, for bridges that aren't safe, for our hospitals closing. There's no one we can point to except those in power. In my district, we haven't elected a Democrat in 30 years. So when I knock a door and they start talking about Joe Biden, I'm like, friend, no, look at Jeff City. Your representative is doing all the things that are making your life miserable.
And in bringing things to a close, we can start looking at 2016 as that turning point of hate and division within this country. Hate and division that has become so caustic and so disturbing that it's allowing these guns to be able to be brought into the schools, be purchased at such unfettered rate, with ammunition availability that is beyond the capacity of what they have within combat units. Because you don't, usually a combat infantry soldier will have, maybe 2 guns and whatever they can carry in their backpack. These people are coming in with multiple guns and doing everything they can to like the Uvalde. What do you have? 4 guns. It's just such a disturbing activity that we're doing. And it's all come about because of Trump. I'm just going to point it directly to Trump as being that divisive character that people love him because he will tear down this country. That's what they want. They enjoy the fact that this guy will be the Messiah that destroys the United States of America. That, my friends, is something that I'm going to fight to my death. So, in closing, we had a wonderful conversation. Jess, you are so awesome. You're such a great ambassador. You've got let's talk just a little bit. I want you to advertise your podcast.
Sure. If anybody on here would like to follow me, I'm Piper from Missouri on TikTok. Or I'm sorry, I've got my things all messed up. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm Piper from Missouri on TikTok. I am Jess Piper Mo. You can find my podcast. It's called Dirt Road Democrat if you search under the Heartland Pod. So I'm underneath them for the time being. And I just had an episode released today where I interviewed one of my friends from New York City and talked to her about the differences in teaching a diverse group of kiddos in New York City versus teaching in a Midwestern or Southern state, that's under a CRT, and I have the air quotes up, a CRT ban. So I would love for all of you to follow me, and I would love for all of you to know that the way you fight back is starting in your state and focusing on your state house and making sure that you are absolutely coming after every single one of those people who we've just given seats away to, right? No more. We don't do that anymore. We stand up and fight, and we are going to make sure that we have someone running against the extremists in every one of our states.
So, what are your short-term plans?
My short-term plans are to keep doing what I'm doing. Like I'm traveling to a college town tonight to talk to kids about, what they can do, how they can help. I will say this. The younger folks don't like to be called Democrats. And so I hope all of us remember that. But they don't like to be called Republicans necessarily either. They are kids who have had enough, who've been through, shooter drills all their life. And we saw it in Tennessee. We're going to see it across the nation, and they're going to try to suppress their vote. But the kids are done. The kids have had it, and they are not going to vote for GOP policies anymore. So I'm traveling the state, talking to kids like that, talking to other Democrats, and trying to raise money for down ballot candidates so that they can do the hard work. And people always ask me if I'm going to run. I don't know. I have no idea what I'm going to do right now. If no one steps up to run for the state rep seat, I may be forced to do it again.
Right.
But I think I'm more effective and impactful by, trying to get 66 people to run rather than just me.
And how can we help you in Missouri and with your efforts when you're traveling? It's expensive. How can we help you?
It is. You can go to, and actually, you don't have to help me in this. You can help down ballot candidates by going to bluemissouri.org. And we have most of our donors around $15, $20 a month. And that way we can budget and we know what we're going to give. We give money to the candidates. We disperse money after the primaries in 24. So once we know which candidates we have, we start dispersing them funds. And it's a bathtub method, which means we start with the people who have the least amount of money, and we fund them. We don't give any money to people who are not contested, no Democrats that are uncontested. But bluemissouri.org, you can read about it. You can see if you like it. And if you do, a couple dollars a month goes a long way.
So next week, we're going to be joined live with Connor Bowman, Taylor Broadbent. We're going to do a special event on Tuesday next week. I'm going to meet with Shantae Gilmore, and we're going to have part of that recording on next Thursday. So everybody who's here today, please come back and join us next Thursday. Taylor Broadbent and Connor Bowman are both young Democrats here in Oklahoma. They're making a difference, and they're making an impact. I'm trying to get more younger people to vote. And we're going to find out more about how they're doing and how effective they are and what we can do to support them in order to get more young people. Because just like what we heard from Jess, the younger voters are the people that we really need to rely on. We need to get them activated. We need to get them motivated and excited about voting and registering to vote so that they can help break this concept of destruction that the GOP is this war that they're waging on democracy. So please come back next Thursday and join us. Jess, it's such an awesome opportunity. Every single time I speak with you and have a conversation or listen to you, I just get pumped up. I'm ready to go out, and I'm ready to run through a wall. You have excited this whole concept up, and I love you to death, and I really hope that you have all the continued support that you need. And if there's anything that we can do to help you, please reach out, because we want to do everything we can to support you in the future. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate every single one of you. Go out, solidarity to every single one of you working inside of your communities. And thanks for having me again.
Yes, and we'll probably call on you again. I'm not sure how things are going. Kelly can talk about it offline, but I think we're going to try to have a women's roundtable coming up in May for 2 weeks, trying to get things put together. So maybe something will happen soon. I'm not sure. Anyhow, everybody, thanks for joining us. I hope you really liked this conversation that we had with Jess. Come back next week and listen in, because it's going to be an interesting conversation. And thank you, everybody, for coming on. This is awesome. We enjoy your participation and your support. If we didn't get to your questions, we apologize. I'll make sure that from now on, we're going to have a little statement at the beginning. So thanks, everybody, for joining us, and we appreciate you. I'm going to end by putting a little music on here, and this is going to be Twisted Sister. We're not going to take it anymore, because really I'm sick and tired of taking what the GOP is dishing out. So we're not going to take it anymore.